Welcome to the Preserving Family Podcast. The purpose of this podcast is to equip you to gain insight, information, and inspiration to help you protect, teach, and guide your family during these turbulent times. Our goal is to provide tools and resources to help you strengthen and preserve your own marriages and families. Now here are your hosts, Dr. Mark and Janie Ogletree.
Welcome, everyone. We are so grateful that you are with us today. I bet by now most of you have heard the word gentle parenting, which sounds wonderful and lovely.
Sounds like that's what we should all be trying to do, right?
Right. It just sounds like just such a wonderful kind of way to parent.
A cozy little way to parent, yeah.
Right. I think we have a lot of opinions on it. So that's what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah. In fact, this is kind of a conglomeration of a lot of cases I'm putting together, but just in the last year in my counseling practice, I've talked to parents who are really worried about a teenager that's in their family that's just very defiant, or a teenager whose grades are plummeting, or a teenager who's isolated themselves, or a teenager who's addicted to social media. One of them, in one of the cases, the teen was threatening the parents, just threatening that they were going to injure their parents and destroy their home. This group now has a lot of questions about their gender identity and things like that. From a spiritual perspective, they're lost and they're disconnected. They're anxiety-ridden. They lack coping skills. Anything that's hard could rock their world. Now, once again, we are not talking about everyone, right? This is just a select group that are being affected. But I wonder if a lot of this, Janie, has to do with gentle parenting to some degree.
Well, let's define gentle parenting, and for those maybe few that haven't heard that term, or maybe understand it to be a little different than what we've kind of researched it to be. But gentle parenting is kind of a rebranded version, we think, of permissive parenting.
Well, yeah, so, kind of a new and improved version of permissive parenting, I think, right?
So it gives it a little sweeter title, right? But basically, it emphasizes empathy and respect, understanding, and boundaries rather than authoritarian control is the definition. And all that sounds really sweet and great. Like, we want to parent with empathy, right? That's a good thing. We want to parent with respect to our children and them back to us. That's a great thing. We want to parent our children with understanding and boundaries and all those lovely things, which is true. And it's all about getting down on their level, like bending down, seeing them eye to eye and talking it out and having conversation and having them use their words instead of hitting. There's a lot that goes into this, but which that all sounds great and wonderful. And there's times for all of that, right? But the problem that we have found is the more that we have dug into it, it's basically, like we just said, it's a repackaged version of permissive parenting.
When you were saying that, Janie, it reminded me of something your dad taught us a long time ago, because he would kind of, go on his own little rant in a soft way, but he would see these parents out in the foyer at church negotiating with their 2-year-old to come back into the church and be good. And I promise you, if you be good, we'll be good as parents or whatever. And he was like, you don't negotiate with terrorists, and you don't negotiate with 2-year-olds. You just kind of tell them what's going on here. But I think we see a lot of that. And it's really interesting to me that a lot of parents today view and think that their children are on the same level as them. Children think that too, right? But that may be because parents open that door. But I think we got to be careful with that.
Well, I was just in Costco the other day and literally had to just stop, kind of act like I was looking at something, but just to watch this mom negotiate with her baby. And the baby couldn't have been more than 2, maybe 2.5, 3.
Toddler age, yeah.
Did not want to go in the cart. Refused, kicking, screaming, crying. And the mom is down on her knees.
Almost begging?
Begging this child, please, honey, let's get in the car, because if you get it, and trying to explain, and the kid's screaming, yelling, won't even listen to the mom. And the mom literally just sat there pleading. You could tell at her wit's end. I just wanted to go over and say, Mom, you are the mom. Pick the child up and put her in the cart.
Well, and part of that...
But I was just,
Well, I was going to say, Janie, but part of that is that parents aren't recognizing that a 2-year-old brain is really different than a 44-year-old brain, right? And that a child's ability to logic and reason and to think it through and to think about it how an adult thinks about it, that's not even there.
No,
right?
they have no reasoning skills whatsoever.
Right.
And I've heard other parents saying, use your words and communicate how you feel. They don't even know how they feel. I don't even know how I feel right now. I could tell you, as watching this situation, I'm watching this mom and I'm totally frustrated. But to ask a 2-year-old to express in words or to...
How are you feeling about not getting in this cart?
Right. Or trying to negotiate is just, I don't know, lunacy, in my opinion. So gentle parenting, and there are aspects that are sweet. Like I like getting down on the level, and as we discipline our child or teaching and making sure they're looking at us in the eye as we're giving them instructions or teaching. And I love the whole being empathetic and loving and trying to understand the situation. All those are good, but the problem with gentle parenting is there's no consequences going on. That if you want to teach that way and try to discipline, that's great. But in gentle parenting, they either just let it go and do nothing or forget the consequences. And that's where we have the problem. Right. So despite its good intentions, I think it may be inadvertently causing harm to this generation by hindering their resilience, teaching them to respect authority, teaching them that they are the center of the world, that they are so entitled that whatever they want, they get. Right. And it's also fostering kind of an aversion to any adversity. If we just give our child everything and try to make them happy of every moment of their life and just to give in to every win that they have, that is not teaching them. I mean, you're totally walking away from your parental duty.
Yeah. And once again, for all who are listening that are thinking right now, okay, we're going to turn this podcast off right now. We've had it with these crazy people that are telling us all this stuff. Look, everyone, Christ was gentle, right? We want to be like Jesus. There's no question about that. We want to be gentle parents. Hopefully, gentility is one of the characteristics that would describe us as a parent. Oh, my mom and dad, they were gentle. That's great. But if that's all that there is, you're going to be in trouble. You're going to be sunk, because this isn't going to work with everyone. Like you said, Janie, we talked about this earlier. You said gentle parenting probably would work really well with gentle kids. Right. But not all kids are that way, right?
Right. Not all of our children work that way. We had 8 totally different. Like we said, we all wish they came with their own little book of instructions. But they don't. But we had a couple children that if you just looked at them and gave them kind of the evil eye, they would shape up and cry. I mean, But then you had others that it took way more to get their attention.
It took all the horsepower we had, right?
And so, yes. So some of the premise of gentle parenting is kind and loving and empathetic, which we agree with all of those. But it's going to take a whole lot more than just letting our kids run their lives at age 2 and run our life and run our family's life.
Yeah. So with that, we have some data today that we want to share with you. And one of them is just right here. 75% of parents in recent surveys identify with gentle or responsive parenting styles, aiming to raise happier and more emotionally resilient kids. But once again, our question is it working, right? About 60 to 70% of parents identify with gentle or positive parenting styles, according to surveys by Parenting Science and other research groups. And we already talked about what gentle parenting is. But listen to this. Despite this shift in parenting style, anxiety and depression rates in young people continued to rise. In fact, according to the Centers of Disease Control, 20% of teens in our country now experience anxiety disorders, and a 25% increase over the past 2 decades. And that 25% could be low. I've seen other studies that are putting it in the 30s. So once again, our big question of the day is, okay, gentle parenting, great stuff, but what are the consequences? What are the outcomes?
And to me, again, I just want to say that this is repackaged permissive parenting. I love that they give it names like gentle and positive parenting, but that doesn't change the fact that permissive parenting doesn't work, never has worked, and never will work. And we're going to talk about why.
Yeah.
So for anyone who's mad that we're bashing on gentle parenting,
hey, we're not bashing. We're being cool. We're just
hang in there. Let us finish our
let us finish our rant.
So as we have really looked into this and studied it, what we have found is that the millennial generation, who is now raising Generation Alpha, which is basically 2010 to 2025, so this generation.
Anyone born between those years? Okay.
Yeah. So about 14, 15 and younger right now have really had a huge swing from being raised by like boomer parents or...
Boomer parents for the most part.
Yeah. Who that they thought were very authoritative, very strict, very limiting. It's like they've totally swung to the other side.
Right.
And so they want to do opposite for their children. They want to let their kids kind of be free range and make their own decisions and not have all the rules and things like they felt like they were raised
not to be oppressed, you know.
Right. But according to the 2023 survey by the Pew Research, 72% of parents aged 25 to 40 believe that traditional parenting styles were too harsh. And over 60% of those surveyed report favoring more responsive parenting methods like gentle parenting. So they're endorsing those.
Yeah.
There's also a longitudinal study, which means a very long-term study.
Followed them year after year, followed these kids, yeah.
In child development in 2018 that found while empathetic parenting styles can improve self-esteem in young children, it sometimes is correlated with lower self-regulation and increased difficulty in coping with rejection and failure as children grow older.
So they're not coping with hard things, but they're also not managing or regulating themselves.
Well, isn't that interesting? Is they have really high self-worth and self-esteem, but they can't cope in the world.
Yeah.
Which I think we're kind of seeing today with our children and youth. That they think they have all the answers, they know everything, they're going to be the future movie stars and superstars. But yet they get out in the real world and they can't cope.
I think about that a lot in my teaching at BYU, you know, where I will have students come up to me and tell me what I'm doing wrong. They'll tell me how I should teach the class, and they have no qualms about just offering their ideas. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I would have never dreamed of walking up to one of my professors and saying, here's what you need to do better, okay? In Jean Twinge's book, iGen, she talked about a survey that was done of middle school and high school students in America on how they rated themselves academically. And they rated themselves super high academically, but the actual performance academically was low, or at least lower than how they rated themselves. Korean kids in the same age group rated themselves lower, but performed so much higher than they rated themselves. And then Jean Twenge, I thought this was just a great statement, but she said, we're not really number one, but we're just number one at thinking that we're number one, you know. And I think that may describe kind of what's going on there a little bit with high self-worth, but yet no ability to cope, no ability to do something hard. But when you've been told your whole life that you're amazing and you're incredible, and yet you've never really done anything to show that. I mean, Elder Christofferson, you may remember, Janie, him talking about that, where he's raising these sheep as a young 11 and 12-year-old boy. He's helping preserve and save these lambs in a blizzard one night, rubbing them in gunny sacks, keeping them alive. And then when Sherry Dew asks him, you know, what he learned from that, one of the things he talked about is that self-worth comes from doing hard things. And he said, we have too many parents today that tell their kids, you're wonderful, you're wonderful, you're wonderful, but they haven't done anything, you know. And so, yes, I mean, we're on a tangent right now, but we've got to help our kids do stuff that's hard if we want to equip them for the world. That's really what our job is as parents, is let's equip our kids to deal with the hard world that we live in, not live in this fake, you know, kind of bubble, this, what do you call the little bubble with the snow on it, the snow globe or whatever, this protective bubble that where everything is great and perfect when it's really not.
Yeah, Mark, in the book A Nation of Wimps, it says overprotected and overmanaged by their parents, and with few challenges, all their own through which to sharpen their instincts and identities, kids are unable to forge their own unique adaptations to the normal vicissitudes of life. That not only makes them extraordinarily risk averse, but it makes them psychologically fragile.
Which is what we don't want.
Right. It's exactly the opposite of what we want.
Yeah.
This does not raise a healthy adult, right? In the process, they're robbed of identity, meaning, and a sense of mastery, which underlies real happiness. forget too about perseverance. Not simply a moral virtue, but a necessary life skill is to persevere.
To have grit.
Yeah. Whether we're aware of it or not, we're on our way to creating a nation of wimps, they say in this book.
You know, it's interesting. Hera Morano wrote that, I think, in the early 2000s, and now we can almost look at it as almost prophecy of what's kind of happened in the last 20 years with parenting.
So you know what's really interesting? As we've been studying gentle parenting, there are so many websites, blogs, podcasts, everything about gentle parenting. Tons of reels on social media about families that are showcasing their gentle parenting style. And them, you know, talking kids into getting in the shopping cart or not hitting their brother or whatever.
The skills.
Yeah. But what's concerning is there are hundreds of thousands of likes for these. There's families that, you know, are just promoting this gentle parenting style. But does gentle parenting really prepare our kids for challenges? Or is it just shielding them from the necessary experiences they need as they grow up to keep them safe and, again, bubble wrapped? And I just really think that, you know, we as parents, we got to just stop being uncomfortable with seeing our kids uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Because that does not prepare them for the real world. How are they ever just going to have everything handed to them their whole life and all of a sudden go out in the real world where hard things happen? And they've got to have that grit and perseverance.
They have to be able to deal with it, yeah. I think it's really interesting, Janie. Well, we can use Stephen R. Covey, and one of his 7 habits is to begin with the end in mind. And to us, we would say, okay, so with the end in mind, what does all this lead to? Like, what kind of adult comes out of this, you know? And you know what? You know, I'm sure that there are researchers out there that are going to tell us that, yeah, what gentle parenting is going to do is it's going to give us a generation of kind and respectful and courteous, empathetic, yeah, a charitable generation, which is wonderful. But guess what? This is new. I mean, like you said, the name, it's a new name. It's rebranded, right?
It's not new, yeah.
And so right now I would say, okay, number one, let's see. Let's watch what happens in the next 20 years and let's see where it leads. But number two, if we want to sneak peek, then look at all the research on permissive parenting, and I think that will probably help us understand that. Do we want to be teaching our kids the values of gentleness and kindness and meekness and charity? Oh yeah, we want to do that too. But do we want them to be gritty and strong? Yes, right? Gene Twenge, the professor of psychology, the author of iGen. Once again, we recommend that book, iGen, to every one of you that's out there that's listening, whether you're a parent or a grandparent. Shows that younger generations are increasingly sheltered from risk, resulting in what she calls this safetyism mentality. In her book, iGen, Gene Twenge talks about how teenagers today, number one, they don't work that much. They don't have jobs outside of school. They don't really work. They don't get their driver's license. They're not driving. I mean, I remember, Janie, when I was, 14 or 15, you're backing the car up and back in the driveway because you can't wait till the day that you turn 16 to get your license. These kids are waiting. Some of them are even going to college without a driver's license. They don't want to do that. They don't want the risk or anything like that. Now, this is going to sound weird what I'm about to tell you, and I don't mean for this to come across in a negative way, but it's her own research in the book iGen, where she talks about that there are less fights on high school campuses than ever before. And a lot of us would say, hey, that's good, right? I mean, we want less fighting. We're not promoting that. But she also links it to kind of this safetyism mentality where we're just not going to rock the boat or anything like that.
Put ourselves out there or do anything that we know we can't really succeed at or have great
She even
outcomes.
She even puts dating in that category, that the kids are afraid to date today. So they're kind of isolating themselves. They're staying home. They're on their devices, and that's kind of how they roll. So her findings, Gene Twenge, back to her, 46% of teenagers report feeling unable to handle setbacks due to the overprotection they felt growing up. That is a significant statistic.
Like half. That's like half of the teenagers.
Yeah. They're saying, hey, I wasn't prepared by my parents to deal with hard things, and so I'm kind of jacked up now. A case study on resilience. It was published in the Journal of Youth and Adolescence. That's a very prominent journal. They examined students in high school and found that those from families with gentle parenting backgrounds scored lower on resilience tests compared to those from families with balanced, and that's what we're really trying to teach today, really, a balanced approach to parenting or traditionally strict approaches. Those kids just did not fare well.
So one of the unintended consequences of gentle parenting is that parents sometimes avoid conflict or fail to enforce boundaries with their children because they don't want to go up against their children. Yeah. They're afraid of them.
Tiptoe through the tulips and keep the peace, right?
Right, because their child might have a meltdown or a temper tantrum or get angry with them, and parents want to be their buddies and not have to be the enforcer. But unintended consequences, we're hearing from so many elementary school teachers and middle school teachers and even high school teachers that are almost ready to quit the profession because they cannot handle the gentle parenting movement in their schools because these kids have no respect for authority. They can't be told anything. They can't be disciplined. The kids just run wild. And then when they speak to the parents are so defensive of their children and blame the teacher. Well, if my child has a problem, then you must be a bad teacher.
Right.
Or things like that. Or they'll set a boundary for the classroom, but that one child is running over here in circles and won't behave because his parents don't care and told him that he can do whatever he wants. And so this is a real problem that's going on in the real world.
Yeah, and I've seen some of those teachers in my counseling practice, and some actually have quit. Some have actually said it is not worth it to me dealing with those parents.
We heard about a lady that was teaching ballet to little 5 and 6-year-olds and wanted them just to all line up. You know, she was teaching them the dance, and in order to do the dance, they all had to march in a line or whatever. And she had this one little girl who refused to do anything that the teacher asked her to do. And it just got to be a problem week after week and for all the other kids. So she went over to the mom and, and said, "Hey, can I get your help? Your daughter just won't stand in line." And the mom blew up at the dance teacher and said, it's her right to do whatever she wants. I've taught her that she does not have to obey any authority. So if that's what she wants to do, that's her choice. And I'm like, how does she be part of the dance if she's just over here doing her own thing? And again, parents, these are the unintentional consequences of letting your kids do whatever they want and the free reign.
And once again, where does it lead? Where does it lead? This survey by the National Education Association reports that 68% of teachers observe students increasingly struggling with critical feedback and independent problem solving, which they attribute in part to a parenting style that would avoid confrontation or challenging your kid or talking to your kid in a very direct way. And then there's other research by the APA, the American Psychological Association, telling us that children raised in overly gentle households are 22% more likely to exhibit dependency behaviors by the age of 10. And they have difficulty transitioning to be independent, right? To do independent tasks. And so, yeah, the data is backing this up, that this is, we got to be careful, because if it's just gentle, if it's not balanced, and this is all that there is, the outcomes are not great. So another book that we recommend, Anti-Fragile by Nassim Taleb, another incredible book about, coddling. In fact, it's from the same authors who wrote The Coddling of the American Mind. And he mentions in his book 3 levels of strength. And the first one is fragile, so obviously that does not sound real strong. He likens that to fine china plates or teacups. They break easily. They cannot heal themselves or repair themselves. They have to be handled gently and protected, right?
Because if they do break, they shatter in a million pieces. We have tile, and I've done it, and I know.
Right. And that's one Humpty Dumpty that you're probably not putting back together
Never.
Again, right?
The second is resilient. If something is resilient, it can withstand shock. For example, plastic is resilient. Mm-hmm. If you drop a plastic cup on the floor, it's going to survive the fall.
Yeah. And then the third level of strength is anti-fragile. What a great word. And he says, many of the important systems in our economic and political life are like our immune systems. They actually require stress and challenge to learn, to adapt, and to grow. And guess what he says? He says, children are anti-fragile. And he says, systems that are anti-fragile become rigid, weak, and inefficient when nothing challenges them or pushes them to respond vigorously. Muscles, bones, and children are anti-fragile. Isn't that great?
And that's such a great analogy because there's probably no one listening that doesn't work out or want to improve their body. And we all know how important it is to, strength train and all that, to grow muscles.
Right.
And children are the exact same way. They've got to be kind of broken down and stressed and put pressure on them so that they can build up stronger.
Yeah. So in his book, once again, Talib says this. He says, just as spending a month in bed leads to muscle atrophy, complex systems are weakened, even killed, when deprived of stress. And much of our modern structured world has been harming us with top-down policies and contraptions which do precisely this, an insult to the anti-fragility of systems. And then he concludes with this idea that parents who are overprotective are ironically the ones hurting their children the most. So, Janie, Heimgenott is considered just one of the great child developmentalists of our day. When I say of our day, I mean he died many years ago, but he was just probably way before his time. But he said that children need two things in their optimal development. They need to be kind and they need to be strong. And in order for children to be kind and strong, they need parents who are kind and strong at the same time. And so what the research is telling us is that children actually grow stronger when they're exposed to stress, right? Just like with anti-fragility. And
she defines that kind of as like time management issues, facing consequences for behavior, having to get tests in and deadlines and dealing with other people and yeah.
Yeah. In fact, let me read this. It says, anti-fragility refers to the capacity to thrive in the face of stressors, challenge, and change. And studies show that children who experience manageable stress, and Janie, that's kind of like what you just described, right? Time management, facing consequences, develop 18% greater emotional regulation skills by the time they're teenagers. And then in another study, schools that implemented a resilience and character building program reported a 30% decrease in stress-related absenteeism and a 40% improvement in students' conflict resolution skills. So just by introducing a program where they were teaching, children resilience and how to deal with the hard things in life, how to have some grit, there's this 30% decrease in missing school and 40% improvement in being able to resolve conflict. So that works. That's great.
When that's what makes them anti-fragile. That makes their skills grow, their confidence grow, their abilities grow, which makes them stronger and more anti-fragile. That when bad things happen in life, they don't collapse and shatter into the million pieces like the teacups or the china.
Right. There was another study that also showed that as the students were exposed to structured challenges like time task and constructive criticism, their scores on adaptability rose 25%. In other words, they became adaptable, more flexible, more able to roll with challenges. And, we have a lot of children that we know of in our lives where if something doesn't go the way that they want it to, they just collapse and fall on the ground, And we're trying to help them know, let's deal with that. We can deal with that. Here's how you deal with something like that. You don't fall on the ground, you stand up and let's go.
I love this quote by Dr. Madeline Levine from the book, The Price of Privilege. She says, our primary responsibility as parents is not to gratify our children, which of course we often do and happily.
Yeah.
But it's to make certain that they develop a repertoire of skills that will help them meet life's inevitable challenges and disappointments. So that's our goal, is to make...
That's our purpose, right?
Wonderful future adults, right? That's what we're raising them to be, to have skills, to be able to contribute to society, to be able to be a blessing.
But also to be able to manage and handle hard and difficult things when they happen, because we know that in the world that we live in, it's only going to get harder and more. It's not going to get easier, but let's prepare our children and our youth to deal with those challenges.
And again, we talk all the time about authoritative parenting, which is high warmth and love, but also high expectation. And again, there are premises of the gentle parenting movement or at least words that we agree with, right? We love that we're We love to be gentle and caring and raise empathetic children. We agree with all that.
I mean, we could even say affectionate. We love to be affectionate with our children, to hug them, to give them praise and compliments. I mean, that's crucial, right?
But it also has to be, like you keep saying, balanced with
Right.
hard things, with structure, with rules, with
Regulation, right?
yeah, all the regulation. And I love this quote that I heard from someone that said that, and this I think how we feel about our children, right? Or we should, that you are the center of my world, but you are not the center of the world.
There's a
And
difference.
Yes, but I think the gentle parenting is raising children to think that they are literally the center of the world and that the world revolves around them. Where no, yes, you're the center of my world. I would do anything for you. I will happily do anything in my power, that's good for you, but you're not the center of the world.
Yeah, I really like that. And like you say, Janie, we'll just keep kind of pounding on that word balance for a minute. And I love this statement that, are we as parents afraid of seeing our children struggle? You've talked about that a little bit earlier today, that sometimes we just can't handle the idea of our children struggling or doing hard things,
Yeah,
right?
we just need to stop being uncomfortable, seeing them be uncomfortable, because that is where the growth lies.
Right.
None of us like that. None of us like hard things, but that's what's good for us.
Yeah, and we need to provide them with the tools. That's really our job, to handle struggles in their life. And can we be kind and empathetic without compromising on the need for discipline and boundaries? And so this growth mindset and grit study, according to research from psychologist Angela Duckworth, now she's the one who authored the book Grit, another one of our favorite books, right? Students who are encouraged to work through challenges and accept failures as part of learning are 30% more likely to succeed in high-stress environments later on, including college and in early career roles. And then, in another study from the CDC, it's called the CDC Youth Risk Behavior Survey, indicates that teenagers who engage in activities where they encounter both success and failure, this is important, are 40% less likely to develop anxiety in adulthood compared to those who have been protected from adversity. I mean, guys, the data is just so solid on these principles. And so then a review of the National Institute of Child Health and Human Development concluded that children who experience a mix of support and structured challenge from their parents display 50% higher perseverance and 30% greater goal orientation in adulthood. So once again, not to cram all these statistics down your throat, but we've spent some time on this. We wanted to share with everyone what the data is really saying. So here are just some brief ideas on how to raise children with grit, how to raise children that are resilient, how to strike that balance between kindness and compassion, or as you said, Janie, authoritative parenting, where we have high on demand, but also high on warmth. So number one would be to set clear boundaries, even within a gentle framework, and prepare children just for real world expectations. Let's get them ready for the world.
And when you say clear boundaries, they need to know what's appropriate, what's not, how we behave in public, how to have manners, how we act in social situations. I mean, all those things our children need to know right from wrong. That's our job as parents, is to teach them that.
Yeah.
And if we as parents don't teach them right from wrong, where are they going to learn it?
And you can do it, it says, in a gentle framework. Oh, you're supposed to be home at 10 o'clock tonight. It's midnight, so you are going to have some consequences for that. We'll talk about it in the morning, but we're glad you're home.
Yeah. And natural and normal consequences, right?
Right.
Number 2, encourage children to engage in activities where they might fail, such as sports, art, a debate class, to develop a growth mindset instead of like a fear mindset. We need to allow them for failures and teach them that failing is normal, that we all have failed, that maybe we tell them stories of ourselves when we have failed, or how many times it took Thomas Edison to invent the light bulb. It was over thousands of times where he tried and failed, but stories like that where we make it safe to fail and it's okay.
And Janie, with that, I've seen it. I've seen parents where a child comes to them and says, I really would like to try out for this, but I don't think I'll make it. I don't think I can do it. And the parent will say, that's okay. Yeah, don't do that. And you're like, no, let's help them get out there. And then let's give them the tools and the skills to deal with that if they do fail,
Number 3, yes, let's teach our children to be kind and empathetic and loving human beings, and teach them to do that for themselves also. So when they do fail or when they struggle with things, to give themselves a little grace. I think that's included in being kind to ourselves and to others.
I would agree. Number 4, let's teach our children how to solve problems. We don't do that. Often our children will come to us for an answer to something, and our immediate reaction as a parent is to say, well, just do this, or you should do this. In fact, we give a lot of unsolicited advice. We're always telling our children what we think they ought to do. But I think one of the greatest questions we can ask a child or even a teenager is, wow, that's pretty tough. So what are you going to do? And let them kind of think that through. And then we come and help them. But let's let them take some initiative first.
Number 5 is let's do hard things with our children. Teach them to do hard things, whether it's hiking, camping, climbing mountains, working in the yard, learning skills around the home. Mm-hmm. They need to learn and do hard things.
Right.
In fact, I'm on the Stake Young Women Girls Camp Committee, and that was one of the requests from several of the young women leaders is do something hard. Let's do something that makes these girls get out of their comfort zone and do something hard. Which
Reach
I thought,
and stretch.
Yeah, which I thought was really interesting for them to notice that and want their girls to do that.
Yeah,
so
to get them out of their comfort zone. And by the way, we can have fun with that as well. I mean, all these things we're talking about, that could be a fun thing too, right?
Absolutely.
Number 6, encourage risk-taking with some boundaries. Whatever that looks like for you. I don't want to say too many things about that because that could look really different for any family, but let's encourage our children to do some things that could be a little bit hard, whether that's running for an office at school or
trying out for a choir,
jumping off the high dive at the pool. Yeah, I mean, whatever it is, right?
Right. Number 7, help children to do things that they might not like, that are unpleasant. Okay, none of us like to weed the garden. None of us like to clean toilets. None of us want to do dishes or laundry. But we have to teach children that's part of life. Life is not all Disneyland, rainbows, and sunshine, right? That sometimes we have to do things that are unpleasant, but that's, that we need to do that they're helping the family by doing it. And we just do it.
I love that. And then like we talked about some positive things, and maybe we can wrap these up into kind of 3 in 1 here. Number 8, 9, and 10, but teach positive self-talk. In other words, they can challenge their negative thoughts all the time. I can't do this. There's no way. All right, let's teach our children to counter that, to teach them to be optimistic and hopeful and see the good and look for the good. And whatever the negative situation is, Janie used to be really great at this as a parent. When our children came up with all these negative things, you would say, okay, that's it. Get out your paper. I want you to write 3 positive things about that right now. Let's kind of find the positive. And then just encouraging, number 10, this growth mindset that everything we do, we're involved in a process and progression. We're trying to grow and we're trying to learn and we're trying to persevere. And so point out, okay, you're improving, you're getting better. Wow, you think you just failed? No. You are so much better at that right now than you were a month ago. I am so proud of you. That is great. And you're growing and you're improving all the time. So we're identifying that in their lives.
So I just thought of a last one. It's kind of a bonus one, but I think it's huge because it stems out of the gentle parenting, permissive parenting movement. But it's basically teaching them to disrespect authority, disrespect their parents. Teachers, they'll never respect their boss. They'll never respect a police officer. They'll never respect laws of the country. How do you follow a prophet? How do you even follow Heavenly Father and Jesus Christ if they give you commandments, if you have no respect for any authoritarian figure or somebody that's above you?
I actually had a mission president, Janie, call me once and say, this young man needs to come home, and I don't want him to ever come back. He said, we can't have him come back, but he said, I have never met a more disobedient, disrespectful young man in my whole life. He would not do one thing I asked him to do. He fought against every simple thing we asked. And I thought, okay, parents, come on, help us out here, right?
I mean, in the scriptures, it says, children, obey your parents unto the Lord, right?
This, and then it says, for this is right.
For this is right. And so if we are not teaching our children to obey us, and we're just letting them do whatever they want, or we're contributing to whatever they want to do, that's not correct teaching. That's not a correct principle. And
Amen.
So, and Heavenly Father and Jesus Christ have said, if you love me, keep my commandments. And that's the whole premise of the gospel, that we need to follow them to be happy in life, to keep the commandments, just like our children need to obey us, if we, as long as we're righteous parents and we're trying to do our best, but they need to be taught that principle. And that is not happening in the permissive parent world.
Thank you for saying that.
In closing, we want to read one of our favorite stories from Gordon B. Hinckley, one of his conference talk in October 93 about bring up a child in the way he should go. And he said, I read the other day of a father who pleaded with a judge to lock up his son because he couldn't control him.
Oh.
I do not doubt that he has tried, but it is now too late. Attitudes have been fixed. Habits have become rigid. If we are to turn this tide, the effort must begin with children when they are young and pliable, when they will listen and learn. He goes on to say, not long after we were married, we built our first home. We had very little money. I did much of the work myself, he said. It would be called sweat equity today. The landscaping was entirely my responsibility. The first of many trees that I planted was a thornless honey locust, envisioning the day when its filtered shade would assist in cooling the house in the summertime. I put it in the place at the corner where the wind from the canyon to the east blew the hardest. I dug a hole, put in the bare root, put soil around it, poured on water, and then largely forgot about it. It was only a wisp of a tree, perhaps 3/4 of an inch in diameter. It was so supple that I could bend it in any direction with ease. I paid little attention to it as the years passed. Then one winter day, when the tree was barren of leaves, I chanced to look out the window at it. I noticed that it was leaning to the west, misshapen and out of balance. I could scarcely believe it. I went out and braced myself against it as trying to push it upright, but the trunk, now nearly a foot in diameter, did not move at all. My strength could do nothing. I took from my tool shed a block and tackle, attaching one end to the tree and another to a well-set post. I pulled the rope. The pulleys moved a little, and the trunk of the tree trembled slightly, but that was all. It seemed to say, you can't straighten me. It's too late. I've grown this way because of your neglect, and I will not bend. Finally, in desperation, I took my saw and cut off the great heavy branch on the west side. The saw left an ugly scar, more than 8 inches across. I stepped back and surveyed what I had done. I had cut off the major part of the tree, leaving only one branch growing skyward. More than half a century has passed since I planted that tree. My daughter and her family live there now. The other day I looked again at that tree. It was large, its shape is better, it's a great asset to the home, but how serious was the trauma of its youth and how brutal the treatment I had to use to straighten it. And when I first planted, a piece of string would have held it in place against the force of the wind. I could have and should have supplied that string with ever so little effort, but I didn't, and it bent into the forces that came against it. I have seen a similar thing many times in children whose lives I've observed. The parents who brought them into the world seem almost to have abdicated their responsibility. The results have been tragic. A few simple anchors would have given them the strength to withstand the forces that have shaped their lives. Now it appears too late. It is not enough simply to provide food and shelter for the physical being. There is an equal responsibility to provide nourishment and direction to the spirit, to the mind, and to the heart.
I love that talk from President Hinckley, and it reminds me of the verse, right, in the Old Testament, to train up a child in the way he should go, and that when he is old, he will not depart from it. The time to invest in our children is now, when they're young, when they're malleable,
pliable,
shapeable, so to speak, because when you're trying to adjust the trunk of a tree that's 1 foot in diameter, that's not going to move much, right? And so the time is when they're young, but also, we want to be deliberate and intentional as parents. We want to begin with the end in mind, like Stephen R. Covey taught, so that, how is this going to turn out? We're always asking ourselves those questions. How is this going to turn out? And so we have a couple invitations as we close today. One is to think of the way that you parent or even grandparent and consider the idea of the balance between resilience and nurturing. The balance between helping someone possess the attributes of grit and resilience, but also compassion and kindness. I think that's one. The other one is to consider President Hinckley's metaphor of raising children and to see and consider, is there something we may need to adjust now? Because we're asking ourselves the question, where will this parenting practice lead? And as we consider that and consider how it will bear fruit 20 years from now, what kind of fruit that will be, let's think about some of these parenting practices. Everyone, thank you for being with us today. Thanks for joining in. We hope that this was a useful discussion. If it was, then feel free to send this podcast to friends and family. And we're grateful you're with us today. Have a wonderful week, and we look forward to being with you again.